Good afternoon, everybody. I mean, we are a panel that comes right after lunch, which is always a challenge typically, but we have a quite big title here, which is how big biopharma is influencing what's next in cell and gene therapy, which big biopharma is always something about big moves, and I think we would like to chat a little bit about it and hopefully get you excited, even though it's right after lunch. So my name is Daniel Palmacci. I'm an EC member at Lonza and responsible for the specialized modalities. And at Lonza, it's fair to say, we partner with a lot of big biopharma, but not exclusively. Many times we end up collaborating with big pharma because we end up through a license agreement or through acquisition, and then we continue to bring the company along. But it's not about me, it's about the four panelists here, which I think have a very exciting influence in pharma and really what's shaping the future. And with that, I would like to ask you for a brief introduction. Richard, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Wilson, Senior Vice President, Primary Focus Lead, Genetic Regulation at Astellas. I should also mention, proud Pharm.D board member, so remember to sign up. My role at Astellas is really overseeing our AAV portfolio of gene therapies, where we're focusing on neuromuscular disease, neurological conditions, both neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative. And we also have a little bit of work in ophthalmology targeting the retina. So I oversee both our in-house portfolio as well as how we're thinking about working with other companies in both technology and in asset platforms.
Hi. I'm Richard Smith, Vice President of Drug Discovery at Kite. So I'm also the site head for our research facility in Foster City, California, which is co-located on Gilead's main campus. So my team is, we call it the Drug Discovery Core. We build stuff. We do all the fun things in the lab. So thinking about the next generation and the next generation, and working closely with our development colleagues to make sure that these exotic concepts that we're coming up in research are actually tractable and that we can move them forward. And of course, while autologous is our bread and butter, we're starting to think about in vivo in a very big way.
Thank you, Richard. Hi, I'm Christy Siegel. I lead our US Immunology therapeutic area at Novartis. And at Novartis, we have a deep history, pioneering history in cell and gene therapy, obviously with the launch of Kymriah as the first FDA-approved CAR-T in oncology, and also having Zolgensma, one-time gene editing for spinal muscular atrophy. So we have a deep history within Novartis. And as the immunology therapeutic area commercial head, what excites me is really where can we take CAR-T next, and how can we create more broad-scale application to help, honestly, the 400 million people living worldwide with autoimmune disease. On a personal note, I'm a mom of 2 kids who have epilepsy with no family history. And so I'm a scientist by my background. We have been enrolled in a genetic trial, and as a result of that, found that our younger child actually has an ultra-rare genetic mutation associated with autism and intellectual disability. So the work we do in this field and in this community is deeply personal for me, and I'm just proud to be part of it, both as an Pharm.D board member and as a Novartis leader, in our collective impact to bring this type of science to as many patients as can benefit from it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chereau. I'm the head of strategy and business development at Alexion. I guess you know that Alexion is a large rare disease company, which got acquired by AstraZeneca at the end of 2020. On a personal standpoint, I mean, I went to Alexion through the acquisition of Logic Biotherapeutic, which was a gene editing company, sorry. Post-lunch, I need to warm up a little bit. But a gene editing company, which got acquired by Alexion, as I said, and they offered me to stay, so I'm now leading the strategy and the business development. Alexion got very interested in gene therapy, as well as in cell therapy through the overall umbrella of AstraZeneca now.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a question that we have been elaborating for many, many years is, we're at a tipping point for cell and gene therapies, but now again, the question, so what's next? What is it really where this is going to bring us? We went through quite some dip in investment, but now it's like, what can we do next and how can big biopharma support that journey? I would like to ask Christy, maybe first in general, what's your perspective on that, having started the journey with Kymriah and Novartis as a pioneer in that field?
Yeah, thank you. So I think we've learned a lot, honestly, from our experience on Kymriah. And we plan to leverage that. And I was thinking about if I were to say in a short phrase, you know, where does the field stand and what's the possibility? I think we need to think about, you know, what got us here, in Marshall Goldsmith's terms, won't be what gets us there in the future. And so I think the things that we've learned specifically are around innovation. Where are we focusing? So again, autoimmune disease, we're talking about looking at multiple applications of CAR-T within autoimmune diseases like lupus, lupus nephritis, myositis, potentially Sjogren's disease, RA as well. So thinking about where are the populations of unmet need, true unmet need that can benefit. I think also as a large organization, we've learned where else can this technology be applied. So looking within neuroscience, both MS as well as myasthenia gravis, and of course in oncology, where we have our roots as well. So thinking about scale and focus on innovation, where we can have the biggest impact and bring an enterprise lens to this platform as we move forward. That's the first place. The second is manufacturing and stability. I'm sure anybody who knows anything about Kymriah knows that we struggled, and we've learned a lot from that struggle. And as we move forward with our YTB323 program, it is on a different platform, T-Charge platform, which will help us. Our goal is to create stability of the supply chain and also make it a faster turnaround time for providers and centers. And I think the last thing, when I think about what we've learned and what is also quite unique about autoimmune disease, is the fact that we have different expertise that we're bringing together. So the reality is that rheumatologists, these patients are in the community setting and treated, diagnosed and treated by rheumatologists. What we're learning is that many rheumatologists don't have relationships with hem-oncs. So how are we building these connections now while we're in the drug development phase to help set the stage for sharing of patients and creating a rapport and a referral pattern that will be frankly necessary if this great science is actually going to make it into the hands of patients moving forward.
And clearly breaking the barrier, so not focusing CAR-T, but then it's a different group you have access to that will help you thrive and bring it to the next level, right? Speaking of CAR-T, I think Richard and your work in Kite, you're also one of the CAR-T pioneers, so to speak. Anything you would like to add to Christy?
Well, I mean, I think Christy hits a lot of the big points here. I mean, it's making CAR-T is hard. I mean, it is challenging, and a lot of people have fallen by the wayside there. And I think it's building up the infrastructure and I think the consistency as well, so that the consumers know what they're getting and when they're going to get it as well. And I think it's, you know, certainly in the B-cell depletion space, I mean, CAR-T, when it works, it's the best thing that there is there. And I think it's how do we then capitalize on that, build on that expertise and take it forward, because clearly B-cell depletion is a mechanism that has a lot of uses there.
Switching a little bit, so your experience at Astellas, how would you frame that, and where is what we can hope for at the next stage? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think from the gene replacement and the AAV space, we're a really interesting moment. I think, you know, as Christy highlighted earlier, we've already seen some, you know, really encouraging successes out there when you go back and think about the launch of Zolgensma and how, you know, we've been able to see that now become a global product. And I think as you kind of draw the dotted line to other gene therapies, you can see that the path is starting to clarify. You know, within Astellas, we feel very strongly about the long-term investment we've made. I joined the company through the acquisition of Audentes. But Astellas had been working in AAV gene therapy earlier back as 2010, 2011 in Japan. And so we've had very much a long-term view. And what we see now is, I think, part of the reason I'm excited to be on this panel is there's a really important role, I think, for larger companies here to be the engine of that next step. I think that going through the challenges we've seen in the market with, exuberant funding to, a kind of valley of death, if you will, where everyone closed their wallets, it's really been on the shoulders of folks like us, I think, to think about how can we be the solution that goes from those early clinical results or that early research study to truly take this seriously and make these transformative treatments global products. So for us, that means we've had a long-term commitment to our manufacturing facility. We're very pleased and proud of the work we've done in Sanford, North Carolina, where we've seen dramatic improvements in quality, reproducibility, and importantly, cost. So we think manufacturing is, frankly, it's never going to be easy, but we think it's going to take much less of the headlines going forward. I think we're seeing amazing clinical results in the field. Pick a headline. Unicure made headlines not just a week or so ago by showing impressive results in Huntington's disease, and we're seeing diseases yield that previously were considered completely intractable by the power of the modalities that we're all collectively working on in this room. So I think to try and get back to your question, for us, we think that next step is getting through our key clinical results. For us, we've got a flagship program in Pompe disease that we're really excited about where that's going. We've finished enrollment in our phase 1/2, and getting our organization ready to fill out our commercial roadmap and to become that real late-stage commercial organization.
Well, thank you. Obviously, Fred, what's next?
But before we talk about what next, I'd like to, you were also asking what have we learned, And I was trying to remember when was the first, I've been coming to this meeting since the beginning, and I forgot when it was, so maybe that's not a good sign. But I think what we've learned, and it has been said by everyone here, we've learned that it's very hard. But we should not underestimate all the progress which has been done in the last, let's say, 20 years, 25 years. I'm more talking about gene therapy. CAR-T came a little bit after, but and all what I think. Now back to your question, what's next? I think all this baggage, all these learnings, which has been accumulated initially in small companies and now are reaching the larger big pharma companies, I think will help us to accelerate whatever technology we think about. But I think, we were talking this morning with Richard about how little tidbits of technologies can improve a major AAV program or CAR-T program. Would it be on the preclinical standpoint? Would it be on the manufacturing standpoint, which has been a very important point, or in development and hopefully, it happens for some companies, but in market access and commercialization. So what next? I don't know, but I know it's very exciting. And as Christy said, there are many, many patients who are dying for this type of modality because in many diseases, dying to see this type of modality coming to the market, because for many of these diseases, cell or gene therapy are the only modalities which can address directly the disease.
Makes a lot of sense. When we talk about AAVs, I think there's a lot of immediate thinking about, okay, safety profile. And there's, of course, a lot of, that's only one of the aspects, but then there's what are we doing as an industry to look at AAVs in the next generation that has a safety profile that is less challenging, let's put it that way. Richard, I know when we talk about capsid engineering, for example, is there any thoughts on that?
There are certainly some thoughts. I think the last 2 days have been peppered with this conversation. I want to channel maybe a few comments I've heard in the last couple of days. I'll give some kudos to Faraz Ali, who kind of has been leading some of the charge, saying, we've got a little bit of a kind of a bad news vibe problem around AAV right now. That every situation, and we've been part of this. When you lose a patient in a trial, it's utterly tragic. At the same time, I think it's important that we don't get paralyzed by that, and we think about how do we learn the lessons of what we've been doing as a field, and then apply a very scientific approach to saying, how do we move to the next step to really realize the potential we see? So, I mean, I think there's so many ways of kind of approaching the question. One theme that I think is very, very important is collaboration. I think that's really embodied by ARM, and it's embodied by the audience here today. You know, those of us who have been involved in programs where there have been safety issues, the ability to share our lessons learned is of critical importance. You know, think about how much information there is that historically was always locked away in the silos of large companies. And I think that what I'm sensing now is really a sense that our sector is shifting, and that we're seeing that by coming together in a non-competitive way and sharing these lessons, we can actually help one another and help patients. And I think ultimately that's what we need to do. I do think that we're going to see a whole range of new technologies. We had a conversation earlier on about how cell and gene therapy tends to be a bit like, for those in the US, it's a bit like kindergarten soccer matches or football matches where everyone follows the ball and goes in one direction or the other. And it's like, no, it's going to be gene editing is going to rule the world, or AAV is going to rule the world, or pick your modality. And really, we're in an era where I think we're seeing a grand sorting, and we'll see the right tools really lining up for the right job. We have invested in several capsid collaborations. We want to remain relatively agnostic because we really do believe in that right tool for the right job. So, you know, whether it be local delivery in the CNS or to the retina, systemic delivery using enhanced tropism from a capsid, or in the case of the program we're just entering into the clinic in an XLMTM, we have increased muscle tropism that dramatically lowers the dose that we hope is going to provide efficacy, which gets right away from the one thing we all agree, which is lower is always better when it comes to AAV. So I think I had a bit of a random walk around the question, but maybe I'll toss it back.
No, I think it's very refreshing. When we look at, okay, what's the next modality, what's next, right? I mean, there's, in everybody's discussions now is in vivo CAR T, right? So, Richard, you're nodding, of course, Kite having done a lot of autologous. So what would it mean if there's really a breakthrough now in vivo CAR T, and how would, what's Kite's thinking about that?
Well, I mean, you know, we've talked about CAR T and the successes that we've had there, and there are also challenges. I mean, with the whole process, the delivery, having to go for apheresis, lymphodepletion, and so on. So being able to deliver those same constructs without all of that, actually be able to do the direct infusion of the viral vector, that removes, hopefully, that could potentially remove a lot of barriers, both to access and also costs of goods as well. And, you know, in vivo CAR T is something that we've been keeping an eye on. I mean, I've been with Kite for 5.5 years, and it's always been something we've been paying attention to, because if someone cracks this, that's an existential threat to our business. I mean, that if you make autologous CAR T obsolete, and maybe this is a subject for a later question, I think there will always be a place for autologous. But, you know, we want to make sure that we're in there and keeping up with this. And of course, we have to make LVV. We have our capabilities for making LVV in-house and having that expertise. So in many ways, it's an adjacency. We can build on our current expertise. And then, of course, with our acquisition, hopefully soon to close, of Interius, we're bringing in additional expertise. You know, there's certainly other things you need to be thinking about when you're generating virus that's going to be infused directly into patients rather than put into a bioreactor. But those are learnings which can also apply to our autologous platform as well. So we do want to keep moving ahead on autologous. And as I say to my team, it's full steam ahead on autologous, because we still don't know if in vivo LVV is going to work. But we have to have a presence there, and we have to be involved and you know, have a stake in there. And you know, hopefully this will work, because I think if it does work, the potential for patients, again, going beyond oncology, is going to be huge.
It's going to be huge, but at the same time, what you're saying, it's not going to disappear. Autologous will stay a therapy modality. Is that your thought as well, Christy?
No, I mean, I think, yes. From a Novartis perspective, I think when we look at our portfolio, so my portfolio consists of cell therapy, but is not limited to cell therapies. And we look at a continuum of a patient. And what is the right treatment modality for that patient, for where they are in their disease diagnosis and progression. And so I think there will be many different mechanisms. I think in vivo is exciting because it reduces a lot of potential operational and access issues to getting into the community. At the same time, we don't really know if it's going to work. And so the way I think about things is we shouldn't bank on any one modality. We have the most data, right, with autologous CAR-T. And we should be bold. It's not easy. Nothing, bringing to market what's already been done has not been easy. But the patients are counting on us. That's my simple perspective. And I do think it's our job to say, what will it take to get autologous CAR-T therapy into the outpatient setting? That's what I think about when I think of rheumatology. It's complex, it's not easy, and there's no one simple question or simple answer, excuse me. It's a lot of nudging in the healthcare ecosystem to say what's possible. But I think it's our job to dream of what it would take, because that's frankly the only way we're going to help broad scale patients who actually need the treatments that we have to offer.
But if I may.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I think you can draw a parallel in between AAV, gene editing, and let's call it prime editing, and autologous CAR-T, allogenic CAR-T, and in vivo. Thank you. And I think the beauty of us being here today is that only large companies can be on every front. When you are in a small company, which has been my case for most of my career, you have to focus. You cannot be an allogenic and autologous CAR-T company. You have to choose your camp, And there is so much, and that's what we see. I'm sure you see the same thing in your respective companies. There is so much cross-pollination. I promise myself not to try to use English words which are too complicated, but
you did really well.
Yeah, thank you. But there is this people talking to people, and you have to learn. All the autologous experience, as Christy and Richard were saying, will help dramatically the allogenic. I don't know if it's going to be at the beginning of the development chain, the early stage, or it's going to be at the end, closer to the commercialization, which is going to be definitively different. But it's like AAVs, other learnings. And by the way, I think AAVs still have a great future, but new type of AAVs and so on. But I think the good news here is Big Pharma is investing more and more in the cell and gene therapy field. To some people in the audience, might not be enough, but it's way more than 5 years ago, way more than 10 years ago, and I think it will continue. We will if we can deliver success and good products. I think we will continue to see that, and it's going to be two modalities or multiple modalities, which will be more and more integrated in the day-to-day life of the pharma companies, which most of them started with small molecules. So it's a big technology shift in some ways we are seeing today.
No, thank you. Richard, you mentioned before, Big Pharma is the engine, right? Which is making sense in terms of you cannot only rely on innovation driven by venture capital, but it requires a lot more partnership between Big Pharma, financials, and smaller companies that are willing to either partner or be acquired. Any further thoughts on that? What individual strategies you have within your companies, and feel free who wants to add to that, moving forward?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in on that one. I think we have to have the awareness that we can't do everything, despite the fact our research teams are wanting to scurry around and explore all these crazy new ideas. So yeah, we've certainly got areas where we are going to focus on internally, and that's building on our autologous platform. And what's particularly key for us, and I think this is an advantage that we have in that big pharma environment, our research team is very closely aligned with our process development and our clinical development. I think that's a really key part of it, and they're also involved when we're working with corporate development, looking to bring technologies in, because I know from my early days in another protein engineering company where you go to process development with, look what I made, and they say, how do you expect me to make that? And you don't want to be there. So having that early visibility in the pipeline, I think, really does help with moving things through. So we are very mindful about where we put our resources in and what our expertise is, and trying to carve out some space to explore the biology. I think tumor microenvironment, T-cell metabolism, two very important areas that we're very interested in. I mean, getting into solid tumors is going to be really key. But then what platforms do we have to build on that? So that's certainly where people going out to conferences, talking to people, and again, telling our corporate development colleagues, this is what we think is important. What's out there? And so, yeah, we meet with them regularly. They engage with our scientists, and they're part of the research team.
Maybe I'll add a little on top of your points, Richard, because I think, I might add a modifier to the term engine, because I think, we need the smaller companies as well. We need their engines. Like, I don't know if we're a gearbox or a multiplier. I mean, we have our own homegrown programs, and we also rely on partners. And I think, to me, it comes back to this concept of truly thinking of our business as evolving from, vertically integrated to being much more partnership-focused and partnership-driven. Because, I think it's this old truism that, 99% of the best ideas are outside of your own four walls. I think the thing that I keep in the back of my mind, especially at this moment, is just, as a sector, we need more wins. And by wins, I mean we need successful commercial launches. Maybe it's some successful M&As, whatever it is, but we can kind of feel there's a tension that the system feels a little locked right now. And so I think, to me, that's one of the things that I think we probably all feel is a bit of an obligation to the field. The more we can turn that crank, get the next round of, be it CAR-T, be it an AAV, be it, you name it, then I think the more then we create the reason to believe, we start to help investors feel like they can open their wallets a little wider, new ideas get funded, new co-creation starts to kick in a little more aggressively. So I think that it's important we all see ourselves as part of the same ecosystem. And I think we do have a unique role to play.
Can I just add? So I concur with my colleagues, the Richards, and at Novartis, the recent Kite acquisition was specifically to fill a need. We're focused as well on making difference in genetically driven neuromuscular conditions, and that's not a capability that we have. In addition, I would say, to thinking about the platforms that are going to drive our disease strategies, I also think about it from a commercialization perspective. And how are we thinking about partnerships? I mean, this is a huge lift to not just have the science, but how are we actually going to embed it and make it standard of care? And that varies, I understand, in terms of hurdles based on just the diseases, the rarity or not of them as well. So I think we do need to think differently, especially in fields where there are so many patients in the community setting. What we're doing is not working. It is skimming the surface in terms of the percent of patients who actually have access to let's say, CAR in this example. And it's only going to get more difficult as we broaden our reach. So I just think this is an invitation to us as a community to say, okay, how do we work differently than we have up till now? Because we need to think differently around how can we create, what is it going to take to create the conditions closer to home for a patient? And I'll give you a specific example. The majority of patients who have lupus are women. So 80% of them are women. Again, the majority of them are young women, often of color, sometimes single parents. How many of those people, if I were that person, am I going to drive 150 miles, move there for a month? What is the support system in place to help my family survive, for me to have a job to come back to take care of my family? These are huge decisions. We actually need to put ourselves in the shoes of the patient and think about all the other aspects of their life that needs to be taken into consideration in order to either make that 150-mile journey possible for them, or think about, how do I get that journey a heck of a lot closer to them so they're not having to compromise even more of their life. They're living with a life-limiting disease to begin with. So that, to me, is where I don't have an answer on the partnerships. I just think we need to think differently, that partnerships are not just about the science, they're also about how do we get it into the market in a different way than we are today.
Thank you. So a lot more about the patient's journey. You mentioned something very interesting before, which I've found is a very important aspect, and you were just touching on it. So what also the company is doing, and what I think should be an integral part of influencing what the future brings, which is the patient journey. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
So I think I don't have an answer on it. It's more to me around how are we really thinking about, because this is the work we're doing now. You know, we're 3+ years out, I would say, from when we think we'd be in the marketplace, and understanding what is it that has to be true for that patient to actually get to wherever they're going to be in order to have a cell therapy. So if the rheumatologist is in their community, because that's where these patients are, they're in the community, in a community rheumatology office, how does the community rheumatologist even know what CAR-T therapy is? They don't know what CAR-T therapy is today. Why should they know? It's a totally foreign concept to them. So the idea of how do we make them aware of it? How do we make the patient aware of it? How do we engage in a dialogue that helps the community rheumatologist explain to the patient, also in a culturally sensitive way, what CAR-T is? And then how do we actually make it logistically as easy as possible for them to actually see through the referral? If they're going to refer to a center that does it, to a hem-onc, how do you create that relationship and that trust? Because I think that's going to be fundamentally important in the patient actually going through with the CAR-T therapy itself and still having a relationship with the person who they've had a lifelong relationship with at this point, which is the community rheumatologist, who will be the person who will follow back up with them. But this to me is something that we need to be living and breathing, and how is that different than oncology? It is different, and so appreciating that we have learnings, and that's why I said what got us here today won't get us there in the future, because we've learned a lot, but we have a lot more learning to do, and we can't just assume that our successes in oncology, and I'm not even talking about Novartis or Kymriah, I mean as a collective, we've made great progress, but we have even more to go to be able to affect more people in the community.
Well, thank you. Shifting back to the topic on smaller companies, journeys of integration, I wanted to ask Fred, you have a very interesting background, because you joined actually Alexion from a smaller company, or being integrated from a smaller company doing gene editing, then being part of Alexion for the rare disease, but then as part of an umbrella with AstraZeneca. So from that perspective, being integrated, is there any learnings you would like to share? Anything you would do differently? Any additional perspective on that?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of background.
Sure.
Yeah, as you said. So it's a little bit the story of what we call the Russian dolls. And we got acquired by a company which was getting integrated. I mean, we got acquired by Alexion, while Alexion was 2 years before acquired by AZ, but still in the middle of the integration. So at the end of the day, I have to say it's much better than what I thought. You know? And to be honest, I mean, when many people are leaving companies after acquisition, you know, and Logic Bio, it was a very small company. We were about 40 people at the time of the acquisition. I would need to look more in details, but I would say 2.5 years after, we still have 33 people part of the team, which I think it tells a lot about how we've been able to be integrated into Alexion. What is interesting also in the story, I think it was when we've been acquired, and I think it was the same thing when Astellas acquired Odantes. Alexion and AZ had just a little bit of research, basic research in gene editing and gene therapy at the AZ level, but Alexion had nothing. And it was a decision, a strategic decision, being a rare disease company and with the willingness to become the leader in rare disease, to access another modality. And I think the acquisition of Logic Bio has been the core of what is the gene therapy and gene editing unit at Alexion now, since we had the opportunity to acquire some assets from Pfizer. These assets led to some acquisition. So we are piling up project and people. I'm not sure we can say we pilot people, but forgive my French. But no, I think it's. I don't know if there are any learnings. I think it's, as I said, much better than what I would have expected. Otherwise, I would not be on this panel, maybe. But it's. I would encourage the people in big pharma to continue to welcome people from smaller company because with different experience, different mindset, and also the people from smaller company to accelerate. I mean, not to leave when they get acquired, because there is a lot we can do together. I think, and I think it has been said here, ultimately, what keeps up, not keeps, I mean, what brings us to work hard every day is we want to help these patients who are in needs, and it's a collective effort which is needed.
I wonder if I might add a couple of comments on there, because I think this could be a panel just on its own. You know, it's kind of an embodiment, I think, of the innovator's dilemma, where you know a larger company wants to see a new thing or head out in a new direction, and you know an acquisition or bringing something in is the solution to that. And yet, you know, that solution looks very different to business as usual. And so every time something like that happens, you have an intrinsic tension that builds up within the organization. You know, the organizational antibodies in the larger company tend to rally around the smaller company. And, you know, if you're in one of those situations we were in for a little while where they said, leave these guys alone, let them do their magic in the corner over there and don't disturb them. That works for a little bit of time, but ultimately it never really gets you to scale, which is, you know, back to the topic of this panel. So you can never really wall off the new thing. So the question becomes, how does the larger company start to adopt some of that personality, some of that culture, some of that way of thinking and working of the smaller entity? And at the same time, it's a little bit of give and take. You know, I think from the smaller company side, you have to not look necessarily just at your larger company peers as being kind of fossils or somehow, oh, you guys are the past, or, you know, it needs a certain amount of empathy to actually start to gel and to work. And so I think that, to me, I don't think anyone has the magic solution, but I do think that really being intentional about culture, really kind of having a bit of empathy for both sides of that equation is critically important. Because ultimately, you know, it comes back to like the idea is to scale these things, to like it's like the ship of Theseus, right? You've got to take a plank and replace it bit by bit, and hopefully over time the organization evolves and grows. And that's the way we can bring this technology to, you know, all these patients who are, you know, don't have time on their side.
Yeah, I think you're a bit about culture. I think that's really important. So Kite was acquired by Gilead before I joined, but I think at the time, so we've got a company that does small molecule antivirals is acquiring a cell therapy company. That's quite a diversification right there. And Gilead has continued to bring in new modalities and move out into oncology and inflammation. And now we're kind of at the brink of bringing in another small group as well. And yeah, I think I agree with everything as Richard said. I mean, my first industrial experience was 20 years ago with a protein scaffold company that was acquired by Amgen. We were 30 people, and it was the same thing of just let them get on with their thing, but we also really want to work with you as well. So I think there needs to be some intent around building that relationship and creating the right amount of space and balancing it with the collaboration as well. And yeah, I think there is no one size fits all. You've got to kind of find your way through, kind of depends on the technology, on the people as well. But yeah, I think going in with eyes wide open and making the space to listen to what's going on, because when it comes down to it, particularly with buying a platform, it's not just the technology, it's the people who actually understand how it works. Those are, I would say, they're the most valuable asset, because if they all go, you're just left with some very expensive IP that you don't know what to do with. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
And so I'm not here to make any promotional work for anybody, but I think when I hear to Richards and we had a discussion this morning, I mean, the way Alexion called it was called, when AZ acquired Alexion, they called it autonomy with bridges. I'm sure if you talk to the people who have been at Alexion for many, many years, they won't give you exactly the same answer. The same explanation. But I think what has been well done, and I got the feeling it was the same thing for Kite, and to a certain extent for, Astellas, and I'm sure, Christy, you've been part of something like that too. But it was good to see that a large pharmaceutical company could understand the cultural differences, get interested in these new modalities, and that it has been done with certain subtleties. And now, years after, there is more and more integration. As a big company, you need to align a little bit your way of working, but I have the feeling, and I've been part of that only for a bit more than 2 years, but I have the feeling it has been done in a very respectful and very, how do you say, in a way where the feelings of the other part was understood or taken into consideration.
If I'm owning a smaller company, I come to work for you in a moment. You seem to be really convincing how you have done it, because you touched on many, many aspects, also the communication and the human part, which I think is very important to make such an experience and such an integration with bridges successful. Apparently, you're the living example that that's possible and that's doable, right?
Thank you, Daniel. Maybe that's the reason why they put me in charge of business development, to be a little bit more attractive.
Probably.
That's the French charm.
It's the French charm, for sure.
I'm trying.
Scaling is a topic, right? And I don't want to beat the dead horse, because a lot of discussions have been around financials, how to make it more accessible to more patients, which ultimately means make it more affordable. So any thoughts on beyond what's obvious, maybe some specific thoughts you have on it, other than, we need to automate it and make the processes simpler, which this is what we do a lot, of course, but anything that goes beyond the obvious, any thoughts on that?
Personally, I think it's not a matter of, you're part of a CDMO, so scaling is important for you. I get it. But I think if you have a good product, and I think Christy was talking about the autologous CAR-T, it's more about how you can streamline the delivery to the patient, taking into account all the things you were sharing before about these patients who have to travel and get out of their job for a while. And because at the end of the day, my experience is purely rare disease. I've been in the rare disease space for 30 years or something like that. And I cannot recall many, I wouldn't say none, but many projects where the manufacturing has been an unsolvable issue. It's at the beginning, it can be a burden. Sure, it's not good for the margins, cost of goods and things like that. But I think if you take the overall product in its whole spectrum, it's not here that where we are, at the early stage of manufacturing, that we are struggling. Today, in cell and gene therapy, I think we are struggling more on how can we accelerate the regulatory path, how can we build up, because we haven't talked about that too much, but build up a better commercialization framework, for this new way of treating patients to be well commercialized. And so I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's not, in my view, it's not so much about the scaling. It's more about understanding how you can streamline this path to the patients. But,
I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think it's part of it being stage appropriate as well. We heard from one of the panels this morning about when's the right time to commercialize your process. But then there's also, if you're coming in with a new therapy and you don't know if it's going to work, how can you iterate quickly in the clinic as well? And you've kind of got to prepare for the next iteration before you know how the first iteration has failed as well. So I think there is a tension there between what's your phase 1 process, so you can actually get an answer as quickly as possible, and then can we jump into the commercialized process as well. So I think there's Yeah, I feel I should have a T-shirt made which just says it's more complicated than that, because that seems to be the answer I give to most of the leaders outside of research. But
Christy, when we talk about autoimmune disease, of course, that's a different topic. Logistics,
Yes,
anything you want to add?
I think that's why I keep saying around how do we enable better the community? Because at the end of the day, I personally don't think capacity is going to be the issue. I don't think it's going to be manufacturing that's going to be the issue. It's how do we make these medicines something that is not as simple, obviously, as a pharmaceutical or biologic or a small molecule, but something that's much simpler to access than they are today. The burden is quite high for both the patient and I would even say as we're going into other fields, and immuno is just the first one, right, where there's other specialists that are going to have to be pulled in to a field they know nothing about. And how are we going to do that so that they have an incentive as well? I'm not even talking financial is one aspect, they can't be disincentived, but how do we make it easy for them to also do the right thing for the patient who's in front of them? It's a very different construct, honestly, than how we think about CAR-T application today in oncology. So to me, that's why I start with the question, what would it take? What has to be true for CAR-T to be outpatient? And it's not to say that that's something that can happen quickly, but if we don't think about it, then we don't think about what has to be true from a development perspective. Does 2 weeks of lymphodepletion, why did, I know why we chose that, but does that have to be the way? What else can we be doing to explore other possibilities? And I use that as illustrative. Development is one, regulatory is another, but then the actual infrastructure, mobile apheresis, like how can we use some of the technologies that are out there more at the ground level to help patients closer to home?
I think it's good. It's like innovation isn't just what happens in the lab.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we need to kind of change that mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So it's more complicated than that. I think despite everything, I'm leaving with the sense of there's courage, there's opportunity, and we're not letting go, but we'll tackle it as big pharma with all the tools and all the ammo that we have at hand to continue on that journey. I'm purposely leaving, a few minutes for Q&A. I think we have been requested if we can have a few minutes, so please. Somebody help with the microphone. Oh, there we go.
Great discussion. A practical one. How do all of you compete for funds to do what you think you need to do to grow, I'll not use the word scale, but grow your toolbox, or however you want to call it, grow the business, make it more patient-friendly, but how do you compete in a marketplace where there are a number of things happening, where there may not be as many funds available in 26 that you had in 25, but you still have to compete internally. So how do you do that?
I'll take a bit of a swing at that. I mean, it's a great question because I do think that, I know some of us have had conversations this week how there's a lot of focus obviously on the really tough situation facing every CEO of a small independent company right now for like, how do you make sure you have the runway? And I'd say our version of that within a larger entity is how do you make sure that marginal dollar goes your way as opposed to being invested? Like for us, we have a very large oncology presence. So, I have to sit there and say, well, why is it we should invest in AAV? Maybe you guys have a great idea, but look at the patient numbers we have over here. How do we think about that? So I think part of it is trying to be a little savvy around understanding, who's actually running your company. I know our CEO, Naoki Okamura, pretty well, and he is he literally has the what got us here won't get you there mindset. So he is all in and has a long view on the validity and importance of cell and gene therapy. So I know I can have that in the back of my mind and say, well, I'm not starting from scratch. At the same time, I find we often have to go back to the impact and what we see from patients. because I feel the ace up the sleeve that we have in cell and gene therapy is we're typically dealing in diseases where there's just, the outcomes are not great for patients who don't get treated. And we, I think, are almost very largely working on diseases where you can have a pretty dramatic impact on those patients. And I think that's just a compelling narrative. It's also a very different set of discussions when you think about how you're going to have a conversation with a regulator or a payer. And it's complicated. It's more complicated than it appears, but it's different and maybe helps offset some of the risk in the more traditional parts of the business. So I don't know if there's one clean answer, but that would be my take.
Yeah, I think for us, Gilead we're part of Gilead, and there is such a diverse portfolio, and you've got the antiviral part of the business where you're treating millions of patients, and then you go into cell therapy where you're in the tens of thousands. There is that perceived, from the outside it might look there's an imbalance there in terms of that sort of impact, but I think there is a real fundamental principle at Gilead around we're in it to cure diseases. Gilead did that with hepatitis C. We've got the once every 6 months pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV and efforts to cure HIV. And then, of course, with Axicell now, with the CD19 CAR-Ts, we can say that we can cure in some patients B-cell lymphoma. And I think there is a very strong philosophy of innovating and looking at what something is going to deliver. And as mentioned this earlier, a couple of weeks ago, we had our annual Science Day. So this is in the Foster City campus. We get people from research doing kind of like a TED-level talk. The directions we had were you're talking to smart people who aren't scientists. But we have people from across the company coming, and our CEO, Dan O'Day, is there all day, sat on the front row. He's going around the posters, talking to the junior scientists. And he talks about, we have to out-innovate ourselves. We have to invest in the future. And when you get that from your CEO actually there talking to your research associates, I've had people in my team coming up to me afterwards going, oh my God, Dan O'Day came and talked to me. And it's like, But isn't that great? Isn't that great that there is just that passion for science coming from the top of the house and from the board as well? So, I feel very, very fortunate that, we've got a company that has bold aspirations and is willing to swing for the fences.
Yeah, and maybe I could add from Novartis' perspective, because where does cell and gene therapy fit for a company like ours? Over the last couple of years, we've really focused our organization to only be a pure play innovative medicines organization, and we're focused on 4 therapeutic areas now. We've declared that. We have not historically. So we're focused on immunology, oncology, neuroscience, cardiovascular, renal, and metabolism. And so advanced platforms are critical to enable us to create depth in each of those therapeutic areas. And today's conversation is on cell and gene therapy, but we've actually been a first mover as well in radioligand therapy on the oncology space, as well as in siRNA technology that we're looking to use, again, across therapeutic areas. So when we think about CART, this CART has application in 3 of our 4 therapeutic areas. So there's a lot of scale that we can get as well as an organization with that platform across the business. And Vas loves to go for the hard science. He is a scientist by his background. He is super engaged in every one of our IMB, ECN, any development milestone dialogue. And if I think about it too, having the responsibility of other types of assets, a product like Cosentyx, which I'm sure some of you have seen a commercial for, it costs a lot of money to bring a product like that to the marketplace in terms of dollars. So it's just where do you invest the money? Focusing on rarer, smaller communities might cost you more on the R&D side, but the actual go-to-market requires more creativity than necessarily actual cost as compared to competing against the AbbVies of the world, hundreds of millions of dollars of media spend. So it's to me, it's not necessarily a trade-off. It's what does the opportunity require? And in some cases, it might be direct external spend. In others, it's more creative partnerships. How do we make this a reality? And it's a risk we're willing to take in a diversified portfolio that has depth in 4 therapeutic areas.
Well, it was a very long question, so you get many answers. But maybe 2 points, I would say. First, when you were talking about the marketplace, how do we compete and so on, I will turn back the questions to, and again, I'm relevant, if I am, only in rare diseases. And I think it has been discussed yesterday in the investor panel, but you know, I'm a strong believer that every industry has to police a little bit itself. And in cell and gene therapy in particular, we lived a world where investors were creating companies, one after the others, going after the same rare disease indication. That's when, over time, it creates a little bit more tension, because you may not need 5 products for such a small rare disease, and that's what creates some tension later on in the investor market. So I think community are learning a lot about the past. I hope we will take this learning for the future, being a little bit more selective in the way we are pushing things, and that's what we do in big pharma companies. We don't have 5 product, 5 development, at least with the same modality for the same disease, you know. And another thing I wanted to say, it's, I've been very fortunate to spend 10 years of my career at Genzyme, and Henry Termeer used to say all the time, he said, our mission is to deliver drugs to the largest number of rare disease patients. Our day-to-day job is to do it in an economically viable manner. And I always come back to that. Might sound trivial, but I always come back to that to try to find a new way of thinking when you are facing a problem. Would it be on the market, or would it be earlier in the development of the product? Don't know if it helps, but.
We might have time for one very, very quick question. Please.
Try with
microphone. I promised that we are out of here in 3 minutes.
Sorry, you have the question?
So manufacturing was discussed early in this panel. I think people pretty much agreed there were hard lessons learned early on, but as the conversation went on, it seemed like people were arguing that manufacturing, it's in hand now. We know what we're doing. We can scale. Is that the consensus, or is that still a difficult problem?
No, that's not what I've said. At least, I think it's hard. Everything we do is hard. That's the reason why it's, and we all know that, and otherwise you would not be here. I think it's hard, but my point was more, at least, was more that it's not what's gonna make it or break it in some ways, you know? It's problematic at the beginning, and people claim what has been developed in academia is very difficult to translate to industry and things like that. Sure, but at the end of the day, if you have a very good product, I think, and the field of gene therapy, I've demonstrated it. I mean, the yields you get now in good companies are 100 times what we used to get like 5 or 10 years ago. So my point was more, it's not where the problem will be, in my view. It's going to be hard. Many experts will work about it, and they will find a solution. They will find new ways of developing autologous things closer to the patients, gene therapies, capsids, engineered capsids, which are maybe, easier to manufacture with a better yield, better empty to full ratio. You call it, but personally, I don't underestimate the manufacturing challenges, but I do believe it's solvable. It's not the core of the issue we are facing in cell and gene therapy today, in my view. But
however, from a manufacturing company perspective, it's super hard, and we're trying to make it less hard every day. That's what we love and what we really have a lot of passion
and we have
for.
wonderful partners, to work with.
So with that, we are on time. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. We enjoyed the session.